Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're having a look at another devblog for the next major updates, and this is for another South African vehicle which is going to be added to the sub-tech tree, which is going to be in the British tech tree. This is the Ratel 90. It is based off the Ratel chassis, and it's very similar to all of the other Ratels, but the main difference obviously having the 90 on board of it. It is going to be a light tank and also at rank 4 for Britain, so you will have a little bit more access to another light tank, which is always nice. And also, being on the Ratel chassis, it has a bunch of mobility and also not a ton of armor, so we'll have to see how it works in game. Let's get into the history of this vehicle. In the late 60s, the South African military decided that they needed to change their doctrine, and what they based it around was the idea of highly mobile warfare, which would be based around the small mechanized infantry units. The reason why they changed their doctrine is because the military realized that heavy armor wouldn't really do well in the rural areas of South Africa, just because of the way that obviously the landscape is set up. So therefore, the army needed a new ICV, not just to move troops around, but also to engage in battle and actively support the infantry when they were in the field. So a basic requirement for an ICV was formulated, and a number of both domestic and also foreign designs were evaluated. The domestic company, Springfield Boosing Company, developed a promising six-wheeled ICV prototype. It was called the Buffle, and it was constructed on the basis of the MAN truck, if you know which one that is, which is a pretty handy-dandy truck. They then further developed the Buffle prototype, and eventually it was selected for procurement and entered service with the military as the Ratel. Now, production of the Ratel began in the mid-70s, and after a limited initial batch of production vehicles, which successfully underwent testing, they decided to push forward with major production, and they actually created a bunch of different variants of the vehicle. This included the base model with the 20mm, two mortar versions. There was also a close fire support variant, which was armed with the 90, and then the command and ATGM carrier modifications. In the game so far, we're getting the 20mm version with the Milan. We're also getting the 90mm version, which we're looking at right now. And also, we're getting the version which has the ZT3A2 missile ATGM launcher on the top of it. So we're getting a bunch of Ratel variants. Don't think we're getting all of them because we're not getting the mortar variants, but maybe at some points that'll be a kind of interesting mechanic. So Ratel served in numerous conflicts since their first introduction in the mid-1970s, with nearly all of its active service taking place on the African continent. The Ratel 90 saw its first combat use in 1980 when it was used in the South African border war, where the Ratel 90 anti-tank teams faced off against T-54s and also T-55s on multiple occasions, which cannot have been a very fun fight. And by the end of the production run in 1993, they made around 1,304 Ratels, and these were produced obviously across all variants. And due to its simplistic design and also perfect fit for the dry climate of the sub-Saharan Africa, the Ratel proved at home in the Middle East and also Northwest Africa. So it was exported to other countries. Around a dozen more nations picked up the Ratel, showing its combat effectiveness and also general purpose use, and it is still operated today as an ICV, which is pretty impressive. So on the dev server, the Ratel 90 was sat at 6.7 as a battle rating, and what is interesting about 6.7 for Britain is it has a really interesting lineup. It obviously used to have a very powerful lineup. We're talking Carnarvon, Centurion Mark III, then of course the two premiums, plus the FV4005, and even stuff such as the Tortoise as well. But now with a lot of those medium tanks and heavy tanks going up in BR, you're now left with not a great lineup, it's got to be said. It's one which is definitely needing a little bit of help with just the FV4005 and also the Tortoise there. And the Ratel 90 can give that, it can give you a different option to be able to play that BR, especially since at 6.7 every nation used to have something which was pretty fun at that BR. And now with Britain missing that, it's nice to see that they're at least trying to put something in which will help it. Now the Ratel 90 lives up to its name with having a 90mm. It's the GT2 gun. But one thing you have to understand is this thing has no kinetic rounds. It only has chemical rounds in the form of Heat FS. And Heat FS is a pretty strong round at 6.7, especially since at 6.7 you run into a lot of heavy tanks and also medium tanks, so you should be able to pierce through them pretty well. The one thing it does have an issue with, though, is obviously if there's any debris between you and the enemy, if there's any fencing or if there's any bushes and stuff, so that may be an issue for this vehicle going forward. But I think overall the 90mm should be fine. It kind of reminds me of the Italian light tanks, stuff like the Orbal 74, which does completely fine with its heat at the level that it finds itself at. The Ratel, at least in my opinion, starts falling down when you start looking at its other factors. So the gun's good. The mobility is a little bit questionable. So we have a very large machine here, which is going to create a very large silhouette. And obviously being a light vehicle, it will get access to scouting, so at least it will have that on its side. But because it's a large silhouette, it's very important to be able to move around at speed for something like the Ratel 90. And one of the problems is that this only has a 282 horsepower diesel engine, and it weighs 20 tons. This gives this thing a power to weight of 14 horsepower per ton, which is just not good enough when you compare it to some other vehicles. If you have a look at the RU-251, for example, in War Thunder, which is the exact same BR, at least on the dev server, as this thing, the RU-251 has a much better power to weight than a machine like this, and it's just unfortunately how it sets up. To give you an idea, the RU-251 has a power to weight of 25.9 horsepower per ton, so over 10 when it comes to the ratio. And even though the Ratel 90 can go up to 105 kilometers an hour, the question is, how long is it going to take you to get there? What is its low-end acceleration like? Because its low-end acceleration is the main thing we have to look at when being able to move between points, to be able to be more useful, to be able to get into those positions at the start of the game, to be able to affect the map. So that is the major issue I see with this thing, is actually getting out of the starting blocks and actually getting to positions pretty quickly. But at least once you get to those positions, you'll be able to scout, you'll be able to use the 90mm very, very effectively. Another issue with these Ratels in general is they have no armor. They have around 20mm of armor, so they will get hull broken. But the major one, which isn't really to do with the armor, is actually the crew spacing. So this thing and all of the other Ratels, every one of the crew members is in the front of the vehicle. You generally have the driver, and then you have 2 people in the turret, and that's about it. So even though you have that massive space in the center of it, which normally gets taken up by ammunition, but obviously by taking less ammunition you can make sure that people shoot straight through it, nobody's going to shoot there. Everybody's going to shoot at the front of this thing and just knock out the crew. So its survivability being spacious, like something like the Class 3P, the reason why the Class 3P is, still survivable and quite spacious is because it's very hard to get a shot which can take out the crew in one hit, even just straight through the front, just because of how big the vehicle is, especially with stuff like APFSDS, which is what you use at that BR. But with the Ratel 90, because everybody is bunched up in the front of it, I think it's going to be a very easy shot shot through the front or through the side to be able to knock out the crew of this machine. You know, obviously the large silhouettes is a problem, but I think it has a few others which are even worse. But I do hope that this thing does have a place in the game. As somebody who has enjoyed light tanks for a very long time in War Thunder, I think the Ratel will give something that has been needed for a long time for Britain when it comes to its mid-ranks, which are light vehicles which can scout. You know, a lot of people have been asking for many vehicles such as the Scorpion. I personally would have loved to see the Scorpion in the last few years, and to get some South African vehicles alongside stuff which hopefully will be stuff like the Scorpion in future years, I'm very happy to see them, you know, and I'm glad that they're in the game. At the same time as well, it does open up new opportunities for other nations to be able to add their vehicles into the game. Whether it's Romania, whether it's Czechoslovakia / the Czech Republic, or whether it's, you know, Yugoslavia, or whether it's Australia or Canada. Now with the addition of South Africa in this way, it does mean that it opens the door to other nations being added in a similar way. And at least from what I've seen, there's been a lot of positivity around this edition. Obviously, there are a few individuals who would like an independent South African tech tree and make it, you know, just by itself. But at least for me, I'm completely fine with the way that it's set up. If the way it's set up is either it gets in the game as a sub-tree of another tech tree, or it doesn't get in the game because they don't feel it has enough vehicles for an independent tech tree, I'm always going to take the option where we at least see some of the vehicles and it can be expanded upon, especially if people really enjoy them. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hosest Kishol, Hans, Bareen, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.